What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Hope you are enjoying your weekend. Let's get things started right away. I want to talk about Davante Adams, more specifically some of his more recent comments. A couple weeks back, there were some very interesting comments from David Carr as well that I want to get into. But this entire Davante Adams saga is still, to me, probably the most intriguing aspect of the Packers offseason. I think it was by far and away the most surprising. We hear that all of a sudden Davante Adams is traded to the Raiders for first and second round picks. He was, on the franchise tag, and then they did the tag and trade, and it all very much seemingly came out of nowhere. We're now finding that this maybe wasn't exactly out of nowhere, and this had been building for some period of time. So I want to go through all of that and kind of go through Davante Adams' thought process and how he handled this, Brian Gutekunst's thought process and how he handled this, what the ultimate outcome was, and sort of some of the details that surrounded all of it as well. So let's jump in right away and get started. So as we know, Davante Adams was traded for a first and second round pick that ends up being Quay Walker and basically half of Christian Watson, because remember, they traded the Raiders pick and their own second round pick up to get Christian Watson. So in a way, for Davante Adams, they get Quay Walker, half of Christian Watson, and then they, really saved a significant amount of salary cap space, which probably went into some of the deals that included Jerron Reed and Devondre Campbell, Rasul Douglas, Sammy Watkins, etc. Tough to say exactly how some of that money would have shaken out. I tend to believe that probably Devondre Campbell is a Packer either way, but really tough to say one way or the other. But either way, there were a lot of resources that they had available because they didn't keep Davante Adams that clearly they used for some other players that are now on this roster. But I wanted to take a look at how exactly did we get to this point. So I want to start by going over Davante Adams' decision in this process, because I think there's a few different things that led to this. So the first I want to go over here is Derek Carr's brother, David Carr, who on NFL Network said Davante Adams actually tried to get traded to the Raiders and to Derek Carr from the Packers for several years. According to Derek's brother, NFL Network analyst David Carr, it came close to happening a couple of years ago. So again, per Derek Carr's brother, David, who works for NFL Network, this has been something that Adams actually tried to get traded to the Raiders for several years now and almost came to fruition a couple years ago. So clearly this is not something that just came out of the blue. This is something that had been discussed for some period of time. And this is something that, again, according to Carr, actually almost happened a couple years ago in a trade. And you can say anonymous sources or media, David would know, right? He is Derek's brother and has a real legitimate connection here to somebody who would know if Adams was almost traded. Adams and Carr are insanely close, Derek Carr, that is. So you would think that David would have a real legitimate insight here. It's very easy to believe that this information is 100% true and accurate. So we know that Adams has wanted to play for the Raiders for some period of time now, that it almost happened a couple seasons ago. So why? Was this a money thing? Clearly, it was not a money thing. And we know that because Davante Adams just confirmed in his press conference this past week that the Packers did in fact offer him more money than the Raiders offered him, but he wanted to go to the Raiders nonetheless. So this is not a situation where the Packers were lowballing Adams and Adams, was offended by that, in which case he wanted to go play for the Raiders, who were willing to give him more money. This was not the case. The Packers offered Adams more money. Now, there has been some theorizing and conjecture that maybe the Packers didn't prioritize Davante Adams soon enough, that maybe he wanted a bigger contract a couple years ago, and because he didn't get that contract when he wanted it a couple years ago, it upset him to the point that he wanted to go play for another team. Maybe there's some truth to that. We certainly don't know the full story there, but as of recently, the Packers upped their ante and were willing to offer him more than the Raiders were willing to offer him, and he still wanted to go play for the Raiders. So maybe there was some angst towards Green Bay. That's certainly within the realm of possibility, and there's always going to maybe remain that theory or that rumor out there that maybe Green Bay didn't prioritize him. However, I tend to believe, and there's probably some truth to that, right? I'm sure he probably wanted a bigger contract earlier, but if Adams was requesting a trade to the Raiders as several years ago, and it almost happened 2 years ago, I tend to believe that maybe Green Bay wasn't super interested in trying to, extend and do this huge deal for Adams when he'd already been starting to plant the seeds that he wanted to be a member of the Raiders and so on and so forth. I tend to believe, I have no inside information on this, I tend to believe, and I'm going to touch base on this more in just a moment, that there was probably a request to be traded to the Raiders, and ultimately both sides at some point said, hey, let's keep you a Packer until your contract's up, and then we can work on getting you to the Raiders at that point. So that's what I tend to believe here. I don't have inside information on that. I don't know that for sure. That is certainly conjecture on my part, but that would seem to make some sense if Adams has gone back several years requesting this trade. And in the meantime, again, Green Bay may not have wanted to give that huge contract because, again, he was already asking to move to another team. So money was not the key deciding factor here for Davante Adams. Clearly, family was a huge part of this, and he made mention of this on numerous occasions that he really wanted to be closer to his family so that family could attend games. He wanted to raise his family on the West Coast, so family was a massive part of this. Proximity to family was clearly a big part of this, meaning he wanted West Coast. He wanted to be closer to the, whether California, Las Vegas area, rather than be in the Midwest in Green Bay. It was also clear that whether it be due to proximity of family or not, and you can see this in his most recent comments, he had positive things to say about Green Bay, but it was very clear that just from a city life and, I guess the difference between a Vegas and a Green Bay was a clear differentiator here too. He preferred to be in the bigger city in Vegas, warm weather, rather than small town Green Bay, Wisconsin, where it's just not quite the city life that you're going to get clearly in a Las Vegas. So that played a part as well. Derek Carr was, I don't know if it was more than family, but Derek Carr and family were clearly the two driving factors here. And remember, Carr and Adams were together at Fresno State. They have remained very close friends up until this time and are, now seemingly inseparable. He wanted to play with Derek Carr, and that was a massive, massive part of this as well. Davante Adams also mentioned legacy. He mentioned aspirations of doing really, really big things and being remembered. And clearly, and we don't have to read anything into this, he said it as well, Aaron Rodgers' pending retirement and his back and forth of will he or won't he played a massive part in this as well. And he said he wasn't really at a point in his career that he was willing to sacrifice Aaron not being there after a year or two, meaning the big key here was that he didn't know what was going to happen with Aaron in a year or two, that Aaron could retire at any point, and he wasn't at the point where he was, willing to stay in Green Bay on a long-term deal, knowing that Rodgers could only be there for a year or two. He wanted the security of playing with a quarterback he knew was going to be there for a significant period of time, and that was Carr, his best friend in Las Vegas, and being able to have that security, knowing he was going to know what quarterback was there. So that was a massive part of this as well. But I want to go back to that legacy thing for a second. It's clear that yes, Aaron Rodgers would have been the better opportunity for his legacy for maybe a year or two, right? Because I don't think there's any question that Rodgers gives Adams a better chance when he's there than Derek Carr does. Now, Adams had some interesting comments on that, which we'll get to in a moment as well. But what Adams decided was 1 or 2 years of Rodgers plus however many years of question marks, whether that be via Jordan Love or another quarterback, wasn't as good for his legacy as 5, 6, 7, or however many years he gets to play with Derek Carr moving forward. And that was a big part of his decision as well. So family, proximity to family, Vegas over Green Bay, Derek Carr, legacy, Aaron Rodgers pending retirement, all of those things clearly were a part of Davante Adams' decision-making process here. And to me, it's very difficult to blame Davante Adams for coming to any of those conclusions. You have to remember, first of all, when Davante Adams was drafted, Green Bay drafted Davante Adams. Davante Adams didn't pick Green Bay. And that's part of the process of coming into the NFL is you're going to go to one of the 32 NFL franchises, and you don't have a say over that unless you're an undrafted free agent, right? You have to go wherever you get selected. Now, he didn't have to sign that contract extension that he signed and things like that. So clearly he liked being in Green Bay, but Green Bay chose Adams. Adams did not choose initially Green Bay. And it was easy to see that at this point in his career, he was ready for a change of pace. And when he put all of these deciding factors, being closer to family, being in a bigger city, being closer to home, being able to play with his best friend, being able to cement his legacy with a quarterback of his choosing, whether that's the right choice or not can be argued, but that was his choice. And then, having the uncertainty of what was going to happen with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, you put all of that into the Davante Adams decision blender, and it's not difficult to understand why the end result was, hey, I want to go and play for the Raiders instead. So I think Adams handled this very, very well. Clearly there was maybe some disconnect with Green Bay at some point. I think that is fair to say, but he handled this well. There was discussions of a trade per David Carr at some point in his tenure with Green Bay. He wanted out for some time, apparently, but he played out his contract like a professional, waited until he was an unrestricted free agent, and during that time frame, he could have become a locker room cancer. He could have become a malcontent. He could have caused a huge hissy fit and caused a storm and held out and done all of those things, and he didn't. He was a consummate professional throughout the entirety of that situation, gave Green Bay everything he had, became the number one wide receiver in all of football during that time, developed an amazing connection and rapport with Aaron Rodgers, worked harder. I've talked to you guys on numerous occasions. There are a handful of players on this team where I just love watching them practice. Jair Alexander, David Bakhtiari, Davante Adams, and there's a couple others as well. None of them, to me, compare to how Davante Adams goes about his practice habits and becoming a ultimate professional. And he did all of that while apparently wanting to be with a different team and wanting to be in Las Vegas. And sometimes that's not the easiest thing to do, and we've seen other players handle that very, very differently. For Adams, he played out that contract, his extension that he signed in 2017, which was 4 years, $58 million at the time. He played that out and did everything he could to help Green Bay, this franchise, the Packers, Aaron Rodgers, etc., win a Super Bowl. It didn't happen, but not due to lack of him being the absolute best player that he could possibly be and holding up his end of the bargain. So he wanted to go somewhere else. It's hard to fault him the reasons that he wanted to go somewhere else. He handled it like a professional. He didn't throw a huge, fit in the middle of his contract, played out his contract, and when he became a free agent, pressed a little bit more, even though he didn't necessarily have a ton of, leverage in this situation. Even though he didn't have that leverage, he still waited until he was a free agent and, put a little bit more pressure on Green Bay at that time and was able to find something that worked for both the Packers and the Raiders. So I have a very hard time saying that Davante Adams handled this. I think he handled this as perfectly as could possibly be. And I think his intentions were overall good. And I think, his reasons for doing what he did were sound. So I get it. I don't blame him. And I think he did everything he could to help Green Bay up until the point he was a free agent and then found a way to get to the Raiders, which is what his ultimate destination, which is what he wanted his ultimate destination to be. So how did the Packers and Brian Gutekunst handle this situation? I think the first thing that I love here from Goody and the Packers is the fact that they didn't set precedents by trading Davante in the middle of his contract. Because if he had signed that 4-year extension and then, turned around and asked for a trade to the Raiders and the Packers just granted and say, all right, we'll trade you to the Raiders. Well, now anytime you get a player that signs a long-term deal, whether it be Aaron Rodgers, Jair Alexander, Kenny Clark, David Bakhtiari, any of these big-time players that you sign to extensions, now all of a sudden if one thing goes wrong and they demand a trade or, want to trade out and you're like, all right, well, it just becomes a very slippery slope, right? So I actually love that Gutekunst and the Packers did not trade him prior to the point of becoming a free agent and found a way to keep him around and didn't maybe acquiesce to that demand earlier and found a way to make it work with Davante through the last few years of his contract in Green Bay. So I really like that. First of all, I love the fact that they waited until he was a free agent. And as again, Aaron Rodgers talked about this leverage situation as well, right? He said, quote, Adams didn't necessarily have a ton of leverage. You put the franchise tag on somebody and then that kind of locks him into a number. He could obviously sit out and not play, and that could get really ugly. Ultimately, his incredible value that he gave us a couple of picks, and that's ultimately what he wanted, was to be in Vegas and to kind of start out the next chapter of his career. So Rodgers mentioned as well that Adams didn't have a ton of leverage here, but he also mentioned very wisely that this could have become very ugly between between Adams and the Packers. I think it was very wise of Gutekunst as well to not hold this player hostage as he was a franchise player and try to make him play under a franchise tag, which would have made Adams and his agent clearly very unhappy. There would have probably been a very messy holdout. And yes, maybe again you get him to sign a long-term deal, but is he happy in Green Bay? And is he going to become an issue at some point because he wants to play with Derek Carr, be closer to his family? It just seemed like this was a very logical breaking point, and not keeping a player that didn't want to be here was the right move in this situation. So yes, Green Bay had leverage, and ultimately this is a business, and the Packers and Gutekunst could have played hardball and said, we're all in right now, we need you, and we're keeping you on this franchise tag. It could have gotten ugly, and instead of going that direction, Green Bay decided to get as much as they possibly could in return from the Raiders. They get a first and second round pick, a ridiculous amount of salary cap space by not signing Davante Adams. And I think ultimately you can make an argument that as a receiver who's about to turn 30, that they got a really good return on investment there. You could also argue that if they weren't pigeonholed into just trading him to the Raiders, that maybe they could have opened him up to other teams and tried to get a little bit more. But I actually believe that the Packers did good faith business. Adams gave them everything he could have through the length of his contract, and they repaid that in him not throwing a fit, holding out, doing, malcontent things. They rewarded him by trading him to the team that he wanted to go to and still getting a very fair return on their investment for Davante Adams. So I thought Good did a really nice job of getting Adams to the place that he wanted to be, rewarding one of their star players for giving them everything they could through the course of their contract, not making this messy, and still getting Quay Walker and, again, half of Christian Watson, plus a lot of other free agents in return in this deal. I think both sides ultimately win this. I think the Raiders won this. I think Davante Adams won this. And I think the Packers won this as well. And I know there's a lot of people that will wholeheartedly believe the Packers can't be a better team without Davante Adams. And I get that argument. I really do. It is very tough to trade away one of the marquee players in the league and the best player at a very important position and get better. But I do think Green Bay made their overall roster much more diverse, much more sound, adding players back like Douglas and Campbell, adding a player like Jerron Reed, getting Watson, getting Devontae Wyatt, getting, Quay Walker, and making this team better and more deep all the way around rather than just at one position. I think you can make an argument that Green Bay got as a really good return on investment for this and really made their team more well-rounded. And I think Green Bay's going to have another really good chance to compete for a Super Bowl this season. So I like this by Gutekunst. And the other thing that I want to point out here before we move on from Goody here too is somehow Brian Gutekunst over the past few seasons juggled a very, 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 very frustrated Aaron Rodgers and likely a semi-frustrated Davante Adams as well, who was requesting a trade multiple years ago. And I know that ultimately this has not paid off in a Super Bowl yet, but as a general manager, those are really difficult things to navigate. And yes, Gutekunst deserves some of the blame for why Aaron Rodgers specifically was frustrated in the first place, how they handled the Jordan Love drafting and how they handled some of the maneuvers like releasing Jake Kumerow and just some of those things weren't handled with the care that they needed to. Rodgers was clearly not involved in some of the conversations the way that he needed to be and should have been. So Gutekunst deserves some of that blame. But how you navigate those situations as a general manager when players are upset and demanding trades, or at least discussing trades, is very, very difficult. And somehow keeping Rodgers and Adams on the team and happy and performing at insane levels during that time, giving Green Bay chances to win Super Bowls the last few seasons, Gutekunst does deserve a level of credit for that, because he could have just, shipped away Rodgers and shipped away Adams. And if Green Bay doesn't win a Super Bowl with Rodgers in the next couple seasons, maybe that you can argue that could have been better. But I think how he navigated that and was able to keep those players intact, keep Rodgers still to this day and probably retiring a Packer, getting a return on investment for Davante Adams, not only as a player in Green Bay, but then getting picks in exchange for him as well. I think Gutekunst really deserves a lot of credit for how he navigated that entire situation. Couple other quick notes here. Davante Adams did have a soundbite on Jordan Love as well. He said, quote, "This isn't a shot at any other quarterbacks in Green Bay. I love Jordan Love, especially. He's a great guy, but aspirations of doing really, really big things and being remembered played a part in this." So while it's not a shot at Jordan Love, it does still feel like the uncertainty of Jordan Love clearly played a part here. Not everything, right? We talked about family, and we talked about the proximity to his family in Vegas and playing with Derek Carr. All of those things were clear of importance as well. But the uncertainty of Rodgers and what he was going to do, and then the uncertainty of what Jordan Love and these other Packer quarterbacks would become, or what Green Bay would be without Aaron Rodgers, clearly played a part here. So while not directly a shot at Jordan Love, the unknown of Jordan Love did seemingly play a part here for Davante Adams. I think that's fair to say. And then he did also have a soundbite about Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers. He said, quote, "As far as talent and ability, it's really similar if I'm keeping it real." You have to look at the entire quote if you're really looking at it. He was being very, very complimentary of both quarterbacks. Clearly, and I'm sorry, Davante, but Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers, from talent and ability, it's not very similar. Aaron Rodgers is head and tails above Derek Carr. But if you go back and look at the entire quote, I think you'll have a much better understanding of what Davante was trying to accomplish in that soundbite. So don't just look at that one soundbite, look at the full quote, and you'll get a much better understanding of that. That is going to do it for me today. And in the end, just my conclusion here, I believe Davante Adams worked with very good intentions. I understand why he wanted to go to Vegas. I get how he did it. And I think it was the right time for the right reasons. And I have no ill will, nor do I think other people should have ill will towards Davante doing what he did. I think Goot and the Packers handled this entire situation as best as could possibly be expected. I thought he did a tremendous job with this. And ultimately, at the end of the day, again, I think the Raiders are better. I think you can make an argument that the Packers are better, at least a very similar team to what they were without Davante Adams, and did the best they could in that situation. I think Goot deserves a lot of credit for that as well. Appreciate you joining me. I will be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.